Welcome to the Generic Tech Support YouTube channel. Like and subscribe for more content. Hey guys, welcome to a 2025 domain controller. The reason why we're starting today on a domain controller is because today's video, we're going to review how to properly configure DFS replication services for file servers. The reason why I chose to do this on 2025 versus 2022 is just simply because I had a 2025 server already built. With that said, generally speaking, I would choose 2022 over 2025, at least at this point. The reason really behind that is just because 2025 is still a little buggy, and you don't really want to put a buggy system into production on your infrastructure. So let's talk about DFS replication and why you need it. Chances are if you're watching this video, you've already discovered the reason behind why this is a solution that you want to run on your infrastructure versus putting things all in a cloud. Or maybe you want to configure this to replicate your live data from your internal infrastructure to a hosted cloud location to just store data as a backup. Or maybe still you want to do a quick configuration or a QUIC configuration to set up redundancy between multiple locations and then set up your own cloud style replication for storage and sharing of files. Whatever the reasoning behind this is, I'm going to show you the easy way to do this. So let's start on our actual file server. We're going to start on our source versus our destination. Now obviously you're going to need two servers. You're going to need a source and a destination. And you should try to keep the size, at least of the storage, consistent between the two locations. So if you're going to do this in a VM, set up your LUN, configure your LUN to add the additional storage or whatever the additional source size is to the destination. Because they both have to be the same size, because if you obviously try to replicate a source destination that has a terabyte of storage on it to the replica side, and the replica side only has 500 gigs, then you're going to run out of data storage on the replica side. So you want to make sure that you always have consistently the same sizes on both sides. Now, if you're doing this for backups where you're just going to replicate it from your source to your backup location, then obviously the backup location should have way more storage than the source location. But if you're going to do a bidirectional where you're going to go from site 1 to site 2 and then site 2 back to site 1, then obviously you want to make sure that both of these sides have exactly the same storage. If not, you're going to run into issues. Now there are some cases where you could say, well, I have a terabyte of storage on one server, but I only have 500 gigs on the other server, but there's only 150 gigs of actual stored data. Then that doesn't really make much of a difference, right? Because you're not going to use the full amount of the lower side. So in other words, if the least amount of storage is on the replica side at 500 gigs, but you have 5 terabytes on the source side, but you're only using like 100 gigs of files, then your limitation is based off of the smallest amount of storage available in the configuration. But for the act of this, for the configuration of this, to make it simpler, I'm just going to do both servers have exactly the same storage. So that way we could replicate data from point A to point B and then point B back to point A. When you set up your file share configuration, that's when this gets a little more tricky. But we're not going to get there yet. We're going to start at the beginning, which is basically we have to install the feature on both our source and our destination server with the toolkit to allow DFS replication to work. To start with, click Start on your server and type in PowerShell. You should see something that shows up on the screen that shows basically what we have here. You're going to want to right-click on PowerShell ISE and choose Run as Administrator. Once PowerShell ISE opens, we're going to click on the little leaflet of paper up here for New Script, and you're going to see an area above here that opens. Now, the reason why I do this versus just type it in here is because I could save each one of the scripts in my process as an individual tab, so I know specifically what it is that I ran. So if I have to go back, I have to correct something, or something doesn't go right, I could troubleshoot it based off of the open tabs at the top of the screen. We obviously want to start with installing the file server DFS replication services on our source and our destination server. For the sake of this video, I'm probably just going to show you what to do on the source side, because once we do it on the source side, it will replicate to the other system because of the configuration that we have here. Both systems are online, both systems are on the domain. I'm logged in as a domain administrator. I could hit either side. Okay guys, so freeze the screen here so you could copy down specifically what's written here in the body or the text. For the sake of this video, however, it is just install -Windows feature space fs-dfs-replication space -include management tools, all one word. Once you have that data entered into the box, what you'll do is just hit F5 on the keyboard to run it, or you could choose to hit the little run script here, and you'll notice how it shows it is F5 to run it. If you wanted to run a test or wanted to run a selection, you could actually highlight it and either hit F5 to do that, or you could run this to run a selection of the actual script. However, we'll get to that. For the sake of this, Let's just run F5 right now so we can run the script. You might notice that this may take a little bit to download and install on each server. That's totally normal, and you will need to have an internet connection in order for this to work. Now, for obvious reasons, that should make sense, because if you're replicating data from point A to point B, unless you have some kind of VLANing configuration where you're blocking external access to the internet, maybe running a solid VPN tunnel between the two sites, where you don't have any kind of configuration where you're sending data outside the VPN tunnel, I mean, that would work, obviously, to do your site-to-site configuration, but in order to download and install the config onto the actual server, you will need an internet connection. Obviously, once this is done, you're good to go to just close off that gap to allow the systems to just communicate across the site again. While we're waiting for our installation services to complete, this is the best time to jump back into your DC and just make sure DNS is working correctly. Now, we could see that we're missing our destination or a replica location, and that's because it's not currently turned on. Once the installation completes on the one server, I'll turn the other server on and complete the installation on that box as well. But for the time being, it appears at least that our DNS is functioning correctly on our internal test network. Okay, so our installation completed successfully. We could see this now on the screen that once we ran the install for our features and our replication configuration, we get a true for success, no restart needed. We'll get an exit code of success, and then we'll get the feature results. At this point, I'm going to turn the other system on. I'm going to do the same installation on that, and then we'll jump back into this. At this point, we have the configuration installed on both server and the replication as well as the source server. But I wanted to show you on screen specifically the command you could run on your Windows 11 machine to install the RSAT tool so you can manage the console through your Windows 11 desktop. This would give you the ability to manage the DFS replication setup from your desktop without remoting into the server. During this video, I'm going to walk you through both scenarios, the configuration via the GUI, and then we'll also tackle how to do this through PowerShell. The PowerShell version, in my opinion, is a lot easier, so if you like that more, you could grab that script right off the GenericTechSupport website. So what we're going to do is we're going to minimize the PowerShell configuration because we don't need that right now. We're going to click on Start, and we're going to go to Server Manager. And once Server Manager opens, you're going to see this bar that goes across. It could take a couple swipes before the system actually loads. You're going to have to wait for it to finish out before you can actually select anything. If not, it won't work. It'll throw an error that it's still searching or finding or whatever it is. Once you have the configuration loaded, you're going to see on the left-hand side, File and Storage Services. This is where you would think you would go for this, but you'd be wrong because Microsoft. So if we go over to Tools and we select this, we'll see DFS Management. We could click on that, and that's going to open up our DFS Management console. This is the same console we would see if we installed the RSAT tool on our Windows 11 machine. So if you're doing this from Windows 11, it should look similar. Once the console loads, you're going to see on the left-hand side the choice between namespaces and replication. You would think you'd want to choose namespaces first, but you don't. You actually want to choose replication first, right-click, and do New Replication Group. For the sake of this video, we're choosing a replication group in the style that we're going to replicate between two different file servers. For this, we're going to choose the multi-purpose replication group. However, if you're setting this up to do just backups using VSS Writer, you're going to want to choose the replication group for data collection. Next, we're going to have to set up a replication group name and then a description if we want to describe what this replication group is. Once you have your data entered, you'll just simply hit Next. At this point, this is where you're going to add the servers in the replication group. This is both your source and your destination server for your file servers. To do this, simply hit Add. Since both of my servers start with YTD, I simply just added YTD and hit Check Name. This allowed the multiple servers to show up. We could select one, hit Control on the keyboard, and select the other to save time and only have to do this once. Once you do this, just click on OK. You're going to see the two servers and hit OK. It'll take a couple seconds for the system to add the items to the actual replication group members. Once you guys have the servers added that you want to use inside of your replication group, what you'll do is just select Next, but confirm that these are, in fact, the servers you want to add. At this point, what you're going to want to do is choose Full Mesh. Now, you could choose No Topology if you decide that you want to customize how this replication works. Like maybe you only want to replicate some data or no data or only portions of data. That could be done in a no topology type of configuration where later on in the config, you could set up how you want to replicate the data. Maybe you want to go from server 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 and then 3 back to 1 versus 1 replicates to 1 to 2 and 3. So there's ways to do this where it gives you the ability to customize how your replication looks. But for the sake of this video, we're just going to choose Full Mesh and choose Next. This is where you're going to configure your bandwidth configuration. For the sake of this video, we're just going to choose full. However, if you're using this as like a backup type of configuration, you will want to replicate specifically during days and times. Keep in mind that if you choose to replicate during specific days and times, or you throttle the actual replication, you may not get full clear replication throughout the course of the day. Meaning that if you change one file, it may not change on the other side. And if somebody changes that file on the other side, then it's whatever the newest timestamp is that will win on the replication. This could obviously cause data loss, so be careful with this part. This is where you're going to configure the replication source. Just because you're configuring the replication source doesn't mean that the destination will not replicate back to the source. This part of the configuration is a little misleading because it makes you believe that you're replicating from the source to the destination, and then the destination can't replicate back to you, and that is not the case. I just want to stop here and apologize if you guys could hear the air raid sirens in the background. We're under a tornado watch right now, and they are going off. In this step, it's going to request that we add the replicated folder, or in other words, the location what we want to replicate from and then to. So for this, what I'll do is I'll create a new share inside of the root of my C drive. However, I would strongly suggest that you have a secondary disk lined up or configured for this. However, since we're talking about a temp test configuration, I'm just going to use the local drive. So I'll create a folder called share, and then in that folder, I'll create another folder called tech. Once we get back to the screen, we'll choose add, we'll browse, we're going to go to share, and then we're going to go to tech, and we're going to hit OK, and then we're going to choose OK. Once we get to this step, we're going to have to jump into the other server. The reason why is we have to create the same structure that we created here in order for this to work. So let's jump into the other server and create share and then create the tech folder. Because if we do this right now and choose edit and I choose enabled and I choose browse, you're going to see that my directory just simply doesn't exist. If I hit on the C drive here and I do make new folder, I could do it through here. However, it is easier to do it directly from the other system. It's really up to you how you want to proceed. Once you have your replication side configured, you can add the folder path as we see here. Now this is the folder path local on the other system. This isn't the folder path with a full UNC path or any configuration like that. It is local from the other system, even though we're currently still connected to the source. That could get a little tricky, so keep that in mind when you're doing this configuration. You could also select to make the selected replicated folder on this member read-only. Now, if you do that, then that will screw with your permissions when you go to actually set up your share. However, if you do this for a backup, this totally makes sense, right? Because if you create a read-only copy as the backup, that means that the other copy can't be modified from external sources, which will really protect you from things like ransomware, because then you can't modify them, obviously, from outside of the system. Though usually with ransomware, the whole infrastructure would get infected. It really wouldn't make much of a difference anyway, but there are reasons you would do this. For the sake of this video, we're not going to check that. We're going to hit OK. And then we're going to hit next. This is where we're going to see the actual configuration. And if we look at this, you'll see the list of connections. So we're going from source to replica, and we're going from replica back to source. So that means that we have a full circle, right? So anything that's modified on one will modify on the other, and anything modified on the other will modify back on the first one. Before closing, notice that we have all success. If we click on errors, we have no errors. That indicates that this completed successfully. And then we could hit close. So now we have our replication configuration done. This is specifically our tech share, and we could see the replication here, the to and the from. So this is the data, this is the source, or rather the replica and the source. We could see the staging quota. We could see all the data here, the connections, the replicated folders, the delegation. We could see memberships. We could see how this is currently configured. Now, this doesn't finalize the DFS configuration. This just sets up the replication side. At this point, you can choose whether or not you want to set up the namespaces. Now, if you do a namespace, then what you do is you're accessing a physical name, and that name can determine whether or not the files are accessed from server A or server B. This is helpful in redundancy. So if you're in a situation where you maybe have two sites and they're not the most stable sites with either internet connection or power, you could set this up with namespace. And once you have the namespace configured, basically you're accessing it from the namespace. So that way if server A goes down, server B becomes your primary connection. If server B goes down, server A becomes the primary connection. The problem with doing this is if you're in a situation where you're trying to open huge files, such as like CAD files, for instance, there are additional configurations you're going to have to make in DNS in order for this to work correctly, specifically with weighting. And I don't mean like waiting like as in, hey, I'm waiting for something, but I mean like physical wait, like the heft of something. So like if you make the server appear always busy on one site, then the other site will always be the primary server that you're accessing. This is how you trick older desktops and older systems like Windows XP to communicate specifically with a server that still supports the older version of SMB, so you can run a mixed environment where things will still function. We're not going to tackle that in this video. What we're going to do though in this video is we're going to test this replication. So we created the folder structure here called tech. Now this folder structure exists here and it also exists on the other server. Now usually I wouldn't show this, but on the top of the screen I have a ribbon for my VMware configuration with multiple servers. I have my domain controller, I have this server, and I have the replica. And what we're going to do is we're going to switch between this and the replica and add files or delete files so we could show the replication between the two systems. Let's start on the host. Let's right click and choose new and do text document. We'll call this host. And we're going to notice on this side, we're going to see the YTD source, which is the host name of this particular system. If this replication works correctly, once we add host on the YTD source, we should be able to go up to the top ribbon here and choose our replica and see host exist in the text side for YTD replica, as we could see here. We could further test this by selecting new text document. We'll call it replica. And once we do that, we should see the replica on the actual source side. And we could see that we do. Again, YTD source, there's replica. Now you can see on a LAN, it's basically instantaneous, although these files do contain no actual data. And there are some limitations because if you get to tremendous amounts of data, then it will take time to replicate that data between the two locations. You also have the caveat of, hey, my connection's not all that great. Like if you have a 25 meg connection and we're talking about terabytes of data, it could take days to replicate between the two sites. I would advise you, if you're doing this on a brand new server configuration, that you replicate the data to the host first and then set up the configuration to replicate the data across, and also set up the throttling on the connection, at least initially, to replicate and true out the data before you cut over to the live file server. And just to show there's no trickery, we're going to actually go in here and we're going to shift delete both of these files. And again, YTD source, if I go back to the bar and choose replica, there we go. We have the replica now, and we have nothing in this location. And we could do host name one more time just to show that I'm not playing any trickery. This is legitimately how this works. And it works really, really well if you need to set up replication between two sites. Before we move on, I want to give you a reason why you want to set up replication of the actual shared directory and not the root directory. So right now, we have the ability to throttle tech. So if we know that tech has large amounts of ISO files, and we don't want those ISO files to replicate at the full bandwidth across the network, then we could throttle that connection through tech. However, if we shared share and there was tech and accounting and HR and everything else underneath that one location, we wouldn't have the ability to individually configure our replication in order to throttle specific file structure or folder structure. Now, obviously, the reason you do this is because the accounting department's important, but you as an IT person have the ability to access that ISO file from the internet from the other location. You don't necessarily have to replicate it in real time over the infrastructure. So there's really no reason to send that full bandwidth configuration for tech, but there is for accounting. There is for people that are in like service positions that may need that data right away. Those people should have full bandwidth access. But then there's other people that maybe, I'm not saying that they're less important, but the data is less important to be replicated in real time. And if we're talking about throttling the connection, you want to have the ability to throttle the individual connections versus the entire thing, because it'll make a huge difference in how you do your configuration. I figured it probably wouldn't help you much to not be able to see it, because seeing it is a lot more helpful, right? So we have accounting now configured as well as tech share. And you'll notice that the share location is the root directory. The subfolder accounting is the share as far as the replication is concerned. So we're not replicating share, we're replicating accounting. And we're not replicating share, we're replicating tech. Again, This is so you could throttle the replication and allow bandwidth control and bandwidth limits over your connection between two sites to replicate data in real time. The final portion of this video is the script. Now, the script has gone through generations in that when I originally configured this, I didn't configure it so that we would just modify the actual values. I would modify the actual configuration versus the values, but I've been using it now, and as I use it, it continues to grow and morph and change, much like most things when we modify or we do any kind of scripting. Now, this particular revision of the script is pretty simple. All you really have to do is you have to enter the group name, the folder name, the primary and the replication servers, and then the content path. Now, this script is smart enough that it'll create the content path on both locations. So if you're using the script, it really should be from the dig, right? So from the first setup, not something that already exists. You could still run this if it already exists. It'll just error out that those resources already exist, and it'll still complete. The script itself really isn't that complex. All it really does is exactly what we just did in the GUI, which is basically create the replication groups, add the members, create the replicated folders, assign the paths, and provide the membership access, and then add the connections on the site. And that's all that this does. So let's run it real quick with just hitting F5. We're going to say, do we want to modify the local membership? We're going to say yes. And do we want to modify the remote membership? We're going to say yes. And that's it. We can see that we don't have any errors. Let me just adjust the screen real quick so you could see. So you're going to see that we don't have any errors. This completed successfully. There's no problems in this setup. So now that this is done, let's take a look at the actual configuration itself inside of the DFS Management tool. Once you launch the DFS Management tool after you've run the script, you'll notice that it's not going to show up right away. And that's because this isn't real time. So once you connect to this, you're going to actually have to right-click on replication and choose refresh. This will populate the new replication configuration we just ran with the script. And if we click on this and we compare it to our accounting one, we could see that we have our share details, just like we did in our accounting. If we click on connections, we could see the connections. We could go back, click on connections, we could see the connections. We could see the replicated folders are not published. You can see the same thing here with the not published. And then once again, the delegation is going to be the same thing as far as the permissions are concerned. If any of these are the case on your system where they don't show exactly the same, then something in the script didn't run correctly. Now, while the script is faster than doing this through the GUI, and it's important to note that it's not instantaneous. So yes, the configuration is instantaneous. We could create files on one side, but it may take 10 to 15, 30 minutes tops for the data to replicate between the two locations. We could test this though. If we go into our folder or file explorer, go into our GenericTechSupport, create a new document, maybe create a new folder, and then we could jump through our configuration here back to the replica, go back into the C drive itself, go into share, go into GenericTechSupport. You'll notice that we don't have anything in here yet. It's because the replication hasn't happened yet. It'll take a few minutes before it actually kicks off. Something you could do to check the status of the replication to see if it's still working or if you're just hung is run this command, which is get DFSR connection -group name, and then whatever the group name is that you had configured. This is going to show as the display name in the actual DFS management tool. So when you see that, that is the group name. Once you have this entered, we could hit F5, and this will tell us whether or not we have any errors. So if we move the screen here for a second, just so we could see it together, we could see that we are replicating, we are enabled, we don't have any errors that show. So this should work. We'll give it a couple more minutes here and see what happens. I'm going to show you the clock real quick, which says 2:04 p.m. on the bottom right-hand side of the screen here. Let's give it till 2:06 p.m. and then we'll refresh that screen and see what it looks like. So it actually didn't take that much longer. And now we can see that we do have files and data here. And at this point, we should be able to add stuff on this side and call it replica. And hit enter. And then jump back over to the other server, or the source server, and see that data inside of that location. So there's replica, which we just created on the other server. There's the new folder, and there's the new text document. So this is now working. Hopefully this is helpful for somebody out there on how to do a simple configuration for replication between two sites using DFS and a file server on a Windows Server infrastructure. Something important to note though is this will only work on 2016 server or newer. Thanks again for watching. Thank you for watching the Generic Tech Support YouTube channel. Find the content of this video at https://generictechsupport.com/channel.